It's the 5th of September. Here we are at Broomspring Lane, and we're going to read, and I won't be able to say this word, the Ariyapariyesana Sutta, called The Noble Search. And we're going to be looking at this sutra from a Pure Land perspective, and we'll probably have some discussion as we go along. And we're not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long. But here we go. It starts, as they often do, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Savatthi for alms." So the Buddha's gone off on his alms round. Then a number of bhikkhus went to the Venerable Ananda, who was the Buddha's good friend, as you probably know, and said to him, "Friend Ananda, it is a long time since we heard a talk on the Dharma from the Blessed One's own lips. It would be good if we could get to hear such a talk, friend Ananda." I felt like I recognised this feeling when they said that, actually. It's like, a long time since I've heard a good Dharma talk. Can we have a good Dharma talk today? Can't you get the Buddha to give us one? Then let the Venerable Ones go to the Brahmin Ramika's hermitage. Perhaps you will get to hear a talk on the Dharma from the Blessed One's own lips, says Ananda. So Ananda is thinking he can fix it somehow. "Yes, friend," they replied. Then when the Blessed One had wandered for alms in Savatthi and had returned from his alms round, after his meal he addressed the Venerable Ananda. "Ananda, let us go to the Eastern Park, to the palace of Megara's mother for the day's abiding." "Yes, Venerable Sir," the Venerable Ananda replied. Then the Blessed One went with the Venerable Ananda to the Eastern Park, the palace of Megara's mother for the day's abiding. So the two of them go off and meditate in the park. So there's a tension building. Is he going to get to give a Dharma talk? Then when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and addressed the Venerable Ananda. "Ananda, let us go to the Eastern bathing place to bathe." "Yes, Venerable Sir," the Venerable Ananda replied. Then the Blessed One went with the Venerable Ananda to the Eastern bathing place to bathe. When he was finished, he came up out of the water and stood in one robe drying his limbs. Then the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, the Brahmin Ramika's hermitage is nearby. That hermitage is agreeable and delightful. Venerable Sir, it would be good if the Blessed One went out there, out of compassion." The Blessed One consented in silence. I just think this is fascinating, the way that Ananda gets the Buddha to do what he knows the monks want him to do, is go and give a talk there. It's a great place, you really, really like it, but of course you only do things out of compassion. So, do it out of compassion. That would be a jolly good idea. And he consents in silence. So my imagination is he thinks, he knows Ananda's up to something, but he just goes along with it. He doesn't challenge, he doesn't cause trouble, he just thinks, he's onto something, but I'll go along with it. Then the Blessed One went to the Brahmin Ramika's hermitage. Now on that occasion, a number of bhikkhus were sitting together in the hermitage discussing the Dharma. The Blessed One stood outside the door waiting for their discussion to end. When he knew it was over, he coughed and knocked, and the bhikkhus opened the door for him. The Blessed One entered, sat down on a seat made ready, and addressed the bhikkhus thus: "Bhikkhus, for what discussion are you sitting together now, and what was your discussion that was interrupted?" "Oh, Venerable Sir, our discussion on the Dharma that was interrupted was about the Blessed One himself. Then the Blessed One arrived." "Good, bhikkhus, it is fitting for you clansmen who have gone forth out of faith from the home life into homelessness to sit together to discuss the Dharma. When you gather together, bhikkhus, you should do either of two things: hold discussion on the Dharma or maintain noble silence." And for me, that's another instance of the Buddha, again, respecting where the bhikkhus are at. He doesn't interrupt their discussion. And I love it when he coughs and knocks. So he lets them know it's him outside the door. So if there's anything that they don't want him to hear or see, they can put it away before he gets in. He doesn't just sort of burst in and ride over their dignity, if you like. He respects how they want to present themselves to him. And then when they say, we were talking about the Dharma, he supports that. He says, good, you're doing the right thing. And then to whatever extent they feel that their discussion has any shortcomings or whatever, that's a matter for their own private conscience, if you like. He doesn't override that. And then this wonderful thing, they think, we were just talking about you and you came. And you can imagine sort of subtext, he's so wonderful, he knows, it's like magic. Well, of course, we know it's not magic, it's Ananda, his friend, who's fixed it. And then the Buddha says, Bhikkhus, there are two kinds of search, the noble search and the ignoble search. And what is the ignoble search? Here, someone being himself subject to birth seeks what is also subject to birth. Being himself subject to aging, he seeks what is also subject to aging. Being himself subject to sickness, he seeks what is also subject to sickness. Being himself subject to death, he seeks what is also subject to death. Being himself subject to sorrow, he seeks what is also subject to sorrow. Being himself subject to defilement, he seeks what is also subject to defilement. And what may be said to be subject to birth? Wife and children are subject to birth. Men and women slaves, goats and sheep, fowl and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses and mares, gold and silver are subject to birth. These objects of attachment are subject to birth. And one who is tied to these things, infatuated with them and utterly committed to them, being himself subject to birth, seeks what is also subject to birth. And what may be said to be subject to aging? Wife and children are subject to aging. Men and women slaves, goats and sheep, fowl and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses and mares, gold and silver are subject to aging. These objects of attachment are subject to aging, and one who is tied to these things, infatuated with them and utterly committed to them, being himself subject to aging, seeks what is also subject to aging. And as you can imagine, he goes and so on and says the same thing about sickness and death and sorrow and defilement. I think that's just a good point to pause, actually. Certainly pause the reading. We could pause the recording as well if people want to talk. Would you like to pause the recording and talk freely? Okay. Yes. Well, I just think it's really interesting, this business of seeking what is like oneself. But it feels very familiar. I don't know, that might be I'm not the only person, obviously, because the Buddha talks about it. But the idea of seeking out familiarity and similarity, and that in one's own condition of being subject to sickness and sorrow and all these things that we are, without saying that's all that life is, that I think, I don't know, for me I feel at many levels we seek out what is like us, people that are like us, experiences that are like our own experiences, and things that confirm our own condition, if you like. And I think the Buddha's presenting this as being a closed loop. If you seek what is like you, you stay in the same place. But all these things that we do seek, obviously allowing for the passage of time, that we don't have slavery anymore, and our lives here in Sheffield are not really full of searches for fowls and pigs, elephants, cattle, horses and mares, but we have our own equivalents. These things are to do with, presumably to do with wealth and status and capacity to generate food, isn't it, and transport and many different sorts of goods of life. But I suppose the particularly sort of other power slant on it for me that jumps out to me is seeking what is like oneself as being ultimately a sort of death-bringing process rather than a life-bringing process, and yet we have such a strong addiction to it, I think.
More of the same.
More of the same. More of the same. Even sometimes you think it's different. You think, I'm going to change this or that. Well, it's exactly what Stuart was saying earlier on, actually. Wherever you go, there you are. You still take yourself. So it's when we recreate our own world wherever we go and we look out for the same conditions somehow. And also, it's very strong words, isn't it? Utterly committed to them and infatuated with them. And I think, yes, I am actually. I am utterly committed to all these things in my life that I think are important. I'm pretty infatuated. A lot of my life energy goes on these various things that I think are important, that I'm dedicating my life to. I don't know. Does this ring a bell for anybody else? Or...
The wording, when you started reading Gibran's prophet, when they say talk to us, tell us of marriage, tell us of children, tell us of what of very similar, sort of asking about his wisdom on various subjects. So it's the same cadence, the same kind of...
Yes, there's sort of rhythm in it, isn't there?
So and so.
Yes.
And then the answer comes back, sort of...
Yes.
Is it wives and children are subject to this?
Yes, that's right.
The same kind of rhythm.
There is a rhythm and a cadence to it, isn't there? It's interesting, this whole thing here. I didn't quite know what to make of it, really, about the relationship with being taught by the Buddha. It's what they want. Then they go off and talk together, and he leaves them talking together, and he supports their doing that and praises them for doing that. And then he gives his teaching. I think in the whole of this sutra, you'll see as we go on, I think that there's a sort of underlying question about who to spend time with, in a way. Who do you hang out with? They really want the Buddha's teaching. He chooses the company of Ananda for the day, so he's not with the Sangha the whole day, which is interesting. I think he goes off with Ananda and spends time in a pleasant place.
Of course, Ananda was his attendant.
Yes.
So they would be together.
Yes. But he chooses that one person. That's what they do. He doesn't spend the day with the rest of them.
Also, is that you don't often see the abbot.
Mm.
Always it's good that you don't.
Yes. Yes.
Because the abbot doesn't have the answers.
Yes. 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 I think that's sort of at the back of this somewhere. Like, does somebody have the answers? Who has the answers? And there is a sort of rarity value about the Buddha, isn't it? He's not hanging out with them all day. He's somewhere else. And then he comes in at the special moment, as it were. As you say, you don't see the abbot all day.
I'm wanting to know what the noble search is.
Oh, well, we can find out. We can go on and find out. Shall I carry on then? Yes, that's the very next paragraph. And what is the noble search? Here, someone being himself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, seeks the unborn supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Being himself subject to aging, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, he seeks the unaging supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Being himself subject to sickness, having understood the danger in what is subject to sickness, he seeks the unailing supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Being himself subject to death, having understood the danger in what is subject to death, he seeks the deathless supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Being himself subject to sorrow, having understood the danger in what is subject to sorrow, he seeks the sorrowless supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Being himself subject to defilement, having understood the danger in what is subject to defilement, he seeks the undefiled supreme security from bondage, nirvana. This is the noble search. So I suppose one thing that's interesting about that to me is that he on the noble search remains subject to sickness, death, defilement, sorrow. He doesn't become separate from or not subject to those things. He's still subject to those conditions. He's not unlike another human. He's still a human. He's still another human. But what he's understood is not something about him being a different human, it seems so far anyway, but the danger in turning his aspiration only to what is like himself in those ways. And it's security from bondage. I think that's fascinating. Because security is like sort of safety, isn't it? And then bondage, security from bondage to me means freedom. So it's like both safety and freedom, which is a rare combination in this life, really, I think. Because quite often we give up our freedom to be secure, or we give up our security to be free. And he's saying that this way gives you both freedom and, well, he's again security from bondage, but I read it as being a kind of safety. And that the danger is the bondage. The danger is being tied into this circle, this cycle, the sort of deathly cycle of seeking more and more and more of what you've got already and what you're like already, and digging further and further into the groove. And that's the bondage. And that the freedom is the separation from that. So I'll say a bit about the search for enlightenment. That's the next bit. And I think this is very interesting in terms of who you hang out with, because I think that's one of the basic themes behind this this sutra. Because before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I too, being myself subject to birth, sought what was also subject to birth. One could read that two different ways, which would give two very, very different approaches to Buddhism, actually. Because he's now talking as someone who is enlightened, and what he used to do. And when he says, being myself subject to birth, is he talking about himself now or then? And that there are two very different approaches to Buddhism implicit in that. And I think Pure Land understanding would be that he's still subject to birth, and given we know he physically dies, and that's probably not unique to Pure Land either. And so he goes on in a similar vein. Being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement, I sought what was also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement. Then I considered thus, why, being myself subject to birth, do I seek what is also subject to birth? Why, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement, do I seek what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement? So, again, what jumps out there to me is the question he asks himself, which puts him into the search for enlightenment, is, why do I go on looking for the same conditions? Why do I go on looking for something like me, or you might say myself, but that's a whole other thing we could talk about, really. Is it a search for yourself or is it not? In some ways clearly yes, in some ways clearly no. So here he's talking about the sort of deadliness of always looking for the same stuff. Why do I do that? I think I know that question. Why do I always keep doing the same thing? And then he says, suppose that, being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, I seek the unborn supreme security from bondage, nirvana. Suppose that, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement, I seek the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless and undefiled supreme security from bondage, nirvana. So this is not the moment of enlightenment, but this is like a prior moment in the Buddha's life, when he's saying, why don't I just do it differently? Why don't I go and seek for something that is not me, if you like, other than my conditions, other than what I'm stuck in? Why do I keep going around the same old mire? Now I see these conditions are what condition my life. Why don't I go somewhere else? And then he goes on about his own story. He's still telling his own story. Later, while still young, a black-haired young man endowed with the blessing of youth in the prime of life, though my father and mother wished otherwise and wept with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and went forth from the home life into homelessness. So this is another angle on a story we all know well, which is the Buddha leaving home for his search. But I think it's interesting hearing him telling it this way, actually. Having gone forth, bhikkhus, in search of what is wholesome, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, I went to Alara Kalama and said to him, Friend Kalama, I want to lead the holy life in this Dharma and discipline. Alara Kalama replied, The Venerable One may stay here. The Dharma is such that a wise man can soon enter upon and abide in it, realizing for himself through direct knowledge in his own teacher's doctrine. I soon quickly learned that Dharma. As far as mere lip reciting and rehearsal of his teaching went, I could speak with knowledge and assurance, and I claimed, I know and see, and there were others who did likewise. I considered, it is not through mere faith alone that Alara Kalama declares, by realizing for myself with direct knowledge I enter upon and abide in this Dharma. Certainly, Alara Kalama abides knowing and seeing this Dharma. Then I went to Alara Kalama and asked him, Friend Kalama, in what way do you declare that by realizing for yourself with direct knowledge you enter upon and abide in this Dharma? In reply, he declared the base of nothingness. I considered, not only Alara Kalama has faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration and wisdom, I too have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration and wisdom. Suppose I endeavour to realise the Dharma that Alara Kalama declares he enters upon and abides in by realising for himself with direct knowledge. So you get the picture here that he's gone to this teacher who's extremely skilled and who says, you can do it, just follow my teaching. And he thinks, gosh, he's really good. And then he thinks, it's not just faith alone. You think he's doing that. He's doing it by realising it for himself. I could do that too. I'm going to do it. And he says, do you think I can? He says, yep, sure you can. So here we go. I soon quickly entered upon and abided in that Dharma by realising for myself with direct knowledge. Then I went to Alara Kalama and I asked him, Friend Kalama, is it in this way that you declare that you enter upon and abide in this Dharma by realising for yourself with direct knowledge? So he's saying, I've got it. Teacher, can you just tell me, is it like this for you? And then Alara Kalama says, that is the way, friend. It is in this way, friend, that I also enter upon and abide in this Dharma by realising for myself with direct knowledge. And then he says, it is a gain for us, friend. It is a great gain for us that we have such a venerable one for our companion in the holy life. So the Dharma that I declare I enter upon and abide in by realising for myself with direct knowledge is the Dharma that you enter upon and abide in by realising for yourself with direct knowledge. So here Kalama says, wow, we've got a really fast student here. He's fantastic. He's learnt this stuff. And he says, just like I can do it, you too are doing it. You're doing really well. I'm doing well, you're doing well. And the Dharma that you enter upon and abide in by realising for yourself with direct knowledge is the Dharma that I declare and enter upon and abide in by realising for myself with direct knowledge. So I think that's saying, you're one of us. You've got the same Dharma as me. We're mates. So, and then he confirms it. So you know the Dharma that I know, and I know the Dharma that you know. As I am, so are you. As you are, so am I. Come, friend, let us now lead this community together. Well, life is full of this, isn't it? And it's quite fun, and I think most of us quite like it when this happens. And then he says, thus, Alara Kalama, my teacher, placed me, his pupil, on an equal footing with himself and awarded me the highest honour. But it occurred to me, so the Buddha's got promotion now, he's on an equal with Kalama, and it happened quite quickly because he's very bright, he's doing it quickly. But it occurred to me, this Dharma does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana, but only to reappearance in the base of nothingness. Not being satisfied with that Dharma, I left it and went away. So, a true seeker here, of course. So there's a kind of paradox in there, isn't there? Because in himself, the Buddha realises, actually, this isn't the real thing. But he realises that for himself. How else would he realise it? Not being satisfied, he left it and went away. So we have the same story. I won't repeat the whole thing again because there is a repetitive quality in these sutras, which is very delightful, I think, in terms of rhythm and cadence, as you said. But it's the same story again. Still in search, bhikkhus, of what is wholesome, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, I went to Uddaka Ramaputta, and the whole thing is repeated with Uddaka Ramaputta. Until we get to the point of not being satisfied with that Dharma, I left it and went away. Again, quick learner, got promotion, we're mates, something not right, he goes. And then he says, still in search, bhikkhus, of what is wholesome, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, I wandered by stages through the Magadhan country until eventually I arrived at Senanigama near Uruvela. There I saw an agreeable piece of ground, a delightful grove with a clear flowing river with pleasant smooth banks and a nearby village for alms resort. I considered, this is an agreeable piece of ground. This is a delightful grove with a clear flowing river with pleasant smooth banks and a nearby village for alms resort. This will serve for the striving of a clansman intent on striving. And I sat down there thinking, this will serve for striving. So this is the place where he realizes his enlightenment, not with the other teachers, but in this place, which is, what strikes me is the natural world. It's the natural world itself which provides the conditions. It's not unpleasant, it's not hard, it's not to do with asceticism. There's a nearby village for alms resort, there's water. It's a nice place to be. So he's not following an ascetic route at this point, although he's sitting down on his own. There isn't actually an emphasis on his aloneness, to me, in this passage. There's an emphasis on the support of the natural world, on resources being available. And he describes himself, as he often does, as a clansman. So he's referring just to his nature as being like other people, I think, there, being connected with one of a particular group, one like somebody else, nothing special, but supported by the natural world, and this will do. This will be the place. And he says, then, bhikkhus, being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, seeking the unborn supreme security from bondage, nirvana, I attained the unborn supreme security from bondage, nirvana. And he repeats it in relation to all the conditions, aging, sickness, and so on. And at the end of that, the knowledge and vision arose in me. My deliverance is unshakable. This is my last birth. Now there is no renewal of being. So, again, a story you've heard many times, but this is his realization. And he says, I considered this Dharma that I have attained is profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. And you probably know this story that comes now, where the Buddha thinks it will be hard to teach the Dharma, and thinks he won't teach. So I'll just do some little bits of that, not the whole thing, because I want to conclude with his decision about who he shares it with. Because again, that's part of this theme of who you hang out with, which I think is what the subject is here. So then he says, but this generation, as we would use the word, this generation in time, these people, delights in adhesion, takes delight in adhesion, rejoices in adhesion, i.e. getting glued to things. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination. This is the core of the Buddha's enlightenment. Specific conditionality. Things arise upon conditions. Exactly what is happening now arises specifically on what happened before and in many conditions we know that we can't see. We know there's too much for us to see, but it's very specific, it's very concrete. I suppose we would say that his conditionality for his enlightenment was partly that, those conditions by the river, that beautiful place. Dependent origination. This is the core of it. Which, we've all heard many things about on many other occasions, and let's stick with the main theme here. And it is hard to see this truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all attachments, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nirvana. If I were to teach the Dharma, others wouldn't understand me, and that would be wearing and troublesome for me. So then comes the moment, when Brahma Sahampati comes and says, the world will perish, the world will be lost, since the mind of the Tathagata, accomplished and fully enlightened, inclines to inaction rather than to teaching the Dharma. And then if you remember, the Brahma Sahampati comes from another world, arranges his upper robe on one shoulder, extends his hands in reverential salutation and said, Venerable Sir, and you'll recognize these words from this morning, let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. Let the Sublime One teach the Dharma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dharma. There will be those who will understand. And he persuades him. And out of compassion for beings, he surveys the world with the eye of a Buddha. Surveying the world with the eye of a Buddha, I saw beings with little dust in their eyes and with much dust in their eyes, with keen faculties, with dull faculties, with good qualities, with bad qualities, easy to teach and hard to teach, and some who dwelt seeing fear and blame in the other world. Just as in a pond of blue or red or white lotuses, some lotuses that are born and grow in the water thrive, immersed in the water without rising out of it, and some other lotuses that are born and grow in the water rest on the water's surface, and some other lotuses that are born and grow in the water rise out of the water and stand clear, unwetted by it. So too, surveying the world with the eye of a Buddha, I saw all these beings. So then his question, the final bit of this section for today, the question is, who should he teach the Dharma to? Having been convinced that he should go and teach it, who should he teach it to? And his question is, who will understand this Dharma quickly? And then it occurred to me, Alara Kalama is wise, intelligent and discerning. He has long had little dust in his eyes. Suppose I taught the Dharma first to Alara Kalama, he will understand it quickly. Then deities approached me and said, Venerable Sir, Alara Kalama died 7 days ago. So that's a shame. And then he considers, to whom should I first teach the Dharma? Who else would understand it quickly? Then it occurred to me, Udaka Ramaputta, that's the second one he was going to. It's wise, intelligent and discerning, has long had little dust in his eyes. Suppose I taught the Dharma first to Udaka Ramaputta. He will understand it quickly. Then the deities approached me and said, Venerable Sir, Udaka Ramaputta died last night. Bad luck. So then, the really bright, accomplished people are dead. He can't teach to them. So then he says, and I think this is fascinating, to whom should I first teach the Dharma? Who will understand this Dharma quickly? Then it occurred to me, the bhikkhus of the group of 5 who attended upon me when I was engaged in my striving were very helpful. Suppose I taught the Dharma first to them. Now you'll know the story that he teaches to the bhikkhus, the group of 5, and first of all they go, oh right, it's the Buddha, we know he's off the job now, he's been having a nice time in a park. And then they recognize him and realize, oh actually it's our friend the Buddha, we better listen. And then they are all quickly enlightened. But he chooses them saying they were very helpful. And actually first of all when these bhikkhus come, they say, what is it? Oh, you're not a superior being. That's it. We don't want to be taught by you because you're not a superior being. What special qualities have you got? What special things can you do? You're not. Here we are. How will you have achieved any superhuman states, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones? So they're saying to the Buddha, you haven't got all these super duper spiritual qualities. We're not sure we want to hear it. Have you really got the truth? But he selects them on the basis they were very helpful. They weren't superhuman beings with superhuman qualities. They were helpful. And then they do see it. And what they see is dependent origination, the fact that everything arises on conditions, that they too are dependent. So the Buddha depended on their help, I suppose. And they too depend on all the conditions that generate them. I feel like I should stop and we should discuss that, because that's the key to it in a way. But his friends were the ones who were, I suppose, they were practical, weren't they? They were very helpful. They weren't the super duper enlightened ones. They were just very helpful. There's lots more, but I could go on all morning, but I won't. Yes, that's the thing. Yeah.
The Dharmas before these enlightenment term were techniques.
Yeah.
Meditating is an anchor.
Yes. Yes.
I believe that piece is very kind of sweet. But I feel that when the Buddha sat down under the Bodhi tree, he was hit rock bottom. It wasn't just a discontent.
Yeah. You get that from other accounts of it, don't you, very clearly? Yes.
Done everything, and I'm a bag of bones, and I'm no nearer to. So this kind of attainment, I mean, it's not really an attainment.
No.
You just have to wake up. We all just have to wake up. There's nothing to attain. We don't lack anything. We just wake up.
You get that more from this account, don't you? As you say, in other accounts, you get much more the desperation, the point he got to, and then that he's saved really by Sujata's act of kind of just about getting the strength to sit down and have his enlightenment. But you get more the lack of attainment. It will serve for striving, but you get no account of the striving. It's not in there. He doesn't refer to it. Story, I think it's a story about his friends were and the conditions.
I mean, that's what's interesting. One of the things that's interesting about this is it's a retelling of the same story from a different perspective, a sort of a perspective, looking back and saying, well, actually, what was important was finding the right place for me to do it myself, really, to be in the conditions where I could out.
I'm not sure.
I don't know about that.
No.
No.
Because it would mean that his enlightenment was dependent on conditions. And if his enlightenment is of unconditionality, then having a Bodhi tree, sloping backs, I mean...
I don't think that's important. I don't think that's part of it.
No, I think you can say those are the conditions in which that occurred without saying that they're necessary.
Changing to something completely different. I sort of resonated with me was when he was considering about who he would teach, about teaching the easiest people first.
Yes.
People that was exactly what he felt that were going to be open to what he was going to say and would be able to latch on to what he was saying really quickly. But they were both dead.
Yes.
And I feel that that's a very human kind of thing, because when I think about, what am I going to do, I very often think about, well, what's the easiest thing to do first, rather than what's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And then the other thing was when he went to teach the 5 bhikkhus, they said to him, who are you? To come and sort of basically preach to us. So I thought that was really interesting, that they wanted him almost to kind of like have some proof. They weren't prepared to hear it from somebody who they thought was a contemporary of theirs, that didn't have an had. They wanted somebody who they saw as being better than themselves in some way. So
that's
I thought
how it mirrors the beginning, isn't it?
So I thought that was very interesting as well.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with you actually. I think that's how it mirrors the beginning. I think it was something in there saying, oh, we really want to hear something. Yes, well.
Coming back to what we seem to have different views on, I'm hearing that the Sutra is saying, obviously the specific conditions are not sort of essential, but there is something about finding the conducive conditions.
Conducive conditions, yes, but then it's...
Which have the sort of,
Yeah.
the sort of a certain, well, you put it as a sort of a natural environment that's conducive and having resources nearby that are also conducive to austerity.
I suppose what I would take from that is that's what he did, rather than that's what's required. But I think that's what you're saying anyway.
I think I'm saying conditions are important.
Yes, yes.
Even though it's to be free of conditions, conditions are important to actually realise that. That seems to be the teaching.
I think the thing that I got from that was that he went off to find somebody who could teach him, learn about it from people wiser than himself. And he tried sort of like the two best ones in the land kind of thing. But what he ended up doing was being in a place where he wasn't looking to somebody else to teach him. Found a place that basically was empty. But it was off, that he was out of this world. But to me it was the fact that he wasn't looking for somebody. He'd moved on from that. He'd realised that they could only teach him so much, or that he already knew what they had to teach him. And then he found a place that was empty of people. So he wasn't looking to... That's what I got from it. Not that it was a pleasant place, or that it... You know, he had to have a pleasant place. He had to have certain conditions. He had to have, a nice environment, or a clean stream, or something like that. It was about, he wasn't looking for somebody to teach him, to enlighten him. Place.
I think you can see, yes.
I agree that external conditions are useful. Internal conditions. Maybe to wake up, you just need to be hopeless, be reft, done everything I can, and I'm not, I'm the same as I was.
That comes out much more strongly in other accounts, as you said earlier. But there's a little sniff of it in this account, isn't there, when he jets the other places? Not it. This is still not it. It's still not. I don't know that there's a have to be. I mean, behind this, there's something that's hard to resolve, isn't it? Which is a distinction between people who say that enlightenment, if we use that one, is a gradual matter, and those who say it's a sudden matter. And if you say it's something that happens suddenly, then it's more difficult to be confident of actions, because nothing can lead to, in that sense, as you said about sort of technique-y approach earlier, actions that you can set down. On the other hand, everything is subject to conditions, and so the desperation and letting go and everything collapsing.
That kind of gradual sudden is very much a Zen debate.
Is it?
Yeah.
Within Zen, debate that a lot.
Yeah.
Which as to which?
What's kind of linked to different kind of approaches. And there's a Zen tradition is said to be a sudden approach, and so it's said to be a gradual approach.
Right.
Well, kind of doesn't hold water, because you can't be a bit pregnant. You can't be a bit enlightened.
Yes. Yeah.
That sense of desperation and hopelessness seems to sort of be more in tune with the sudden approach. That you get so desperate and so hopeless, you sort of get to the bottom, and then something arises from that sort of bottom place.
So it's the kind of bottom drops out of your bucket.
Yeah, not make it happen.
Yeah.
But we keep, to bring it back to myself, we keep trying to kind of fill the bucket.
Yes.
There's no bottom in your bucket, but you throw everything back into it to fill the bucket.
That's his business about seeking what's subject to death and all that, isn't
That's
it?
the
Really?
noble path.
Keep on putting it in. Yeah.
But you also know there's no bottom in your bucket. From time to time, you do.
From time to time, you know. Yeah.
I mean, but even while you're throwing stuff in, sometimes you know there's no bottom in the bucket.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what he's describing, isn't it?
But that's not the general human condition to know that, is it? Maybe people know it in some way, but they don't know it in that sort of, with that clarity of why am I doing this. Our culture is about, well, I've just got to try harder, I'm not doing it cleverly enough, I've not found the right technique,
I mean, most people don't. I don't most of the time.
No.
Having these kind of episodes of kind of clarity is a little bit of a curse, really.
Yes, it can be. It can be.
So you can't, well, I mean, how willing are we to be utterly hopeless?
Well, it's something only people can only answer on the whole.
It's not something
It's
you
hard
can
to do.
choose.
No, you can't. Exactly.
You can't choose to be hopeless.
No,
right?
you can't.
You are or you aren't.
You can choose to fight off the hopelessness that comes upon you, choose to struggle with it, or push it away, or give in to it. But you can't choose to be it.
Finally defeated.
Even that you can't really choose.
No.
Not really. Because if you're choosing it, in a sense you're not.
Some choice somewhere, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
So yeah, that is, it's not your kind of personal self. So it doesn't seem to be a thing that you do. It seems to be much more of a thing which is done to you.
How is it done to you?
Well, you can align yourself with the Dharma. But not kind of strive to become enlightened. You can't wake yourself up out of a dream.
No, exactly.
But don't wake yourself up.
No. It requires an openness to being woken, to being contact rushed, or...
Of your own kind of efforts, which is sounding very pure, doesn't it?
It sounds very pure, actually. Yes, actually.
Of your own efforts, you cannot kind of attain enlightenment.
No, you can't. Although we might then start getting to think about what enlightenment is. I don't know whether we should. But
Well, it's a bit of a dirty word.
I know, it's a dodgy word, isn't it? It can get us into all sorts of dark corners, strangely enough. But if we assume it stands for something that we have an interest in, it is. Yes, you can't do it. You can't do it yourself. I don't know, I think that comes out of this sutra, really. But I think that the Kalama and the other guy were the technique-y ones, really. They had stuff that you could attain by your own efforts, you know. It says very clear, doesn't it, of direct knowledge, I know. So these were the ones that were doing the spiritual exercises and achieving all this stuff, and the Buddha followed that. And then found out being super-duper good at spiritual exercises doesn't actually liberate me. He needs to be free from himself, really, not sent more into his own.
That's the thing of the enterprise. Buddha doesn't have much bodhisattva spirit, does he?
No,
There's a kind of
that's fascinating.
That's what I mean.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very much the sort of arahat argument.
Yes. I find that so puzzling. But maybe this is to do again with our idea of the enlightened being, open to Brahma Sahampati. And it says, though out of compassion, I looked at the world with the eye. So Sahampati was able to play on with the compassion that he felt to communicate with the compassion, and the compassion woke him up to saying to different people. And up to then, he's been just tarring everybody with the same brush, hasn't he? They won't understand. And then he thinks, oh, well, there's various kinds of lotuses.
Well, his first thought was,
I'll sit with this, thank you. Yes. I know, isn't that interesting? I can never quite digest that, actually. I do think it's amazing.
Person who's like got it,
Yes.
is enlightened, and then
Doesn't rush around doing stuff and telling everybody. The first thing he wants to do is enjoy it, I suppose. But he is open to persuasion from another being. So then that's interesting, because then he demonstrates what Shad was talking about, actually. He walked by, actually, in some sort of cosmological way, a lesser being, you might say. Actually, he needs to go and teach. And then he spent the next 40 years doing that. So once he's seen it, he does it. He doesn't then go, oh, well, actually, I think I'll just nip back and not bother anymore.
very chink of delusion, isn't it?
Which?
You know, that's Master Mahayana position, you know, and say, you know, I was and will be. You know.
Maybe.
So to have an enlightenment for yourself, I mean.
But maybe it confirms precisely this, that he remains human. Maybe that's one of the real sort of delights of that story, actually. He is still for being subject to what he's seen is not something which transforms him into another kind of, and you know, it's through a manner that he goes and teaches the bhikkhus on that evening. How can I be useful in my day to the bhikkhus? He's having a nice time by the river, meditating and so on.
Plus, all of this is a story.
It's all a story. Yes, it's all a story. I don't know.
Whose story is it?
Don't know.
The Buddha's teaching is part of somebody's story, but do we know who tells it?
I don't know anything about the history of this sutra, and I'm not hot on histories of sutras, and it would be interesting to know. The fact that he was living at Sati in Jeta's Grove and Attapindika's Park dates the story to a certain time in his life, or the meaning of Ariyapariyesana.
If you think about it, I mean, probably no single person except perhaps Ananda could tell that story that way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because there's some bits that only take place between the Buddha and Ananda,
That's right.
so no one else could know about it unless Ananda's talked about it. And it's from Ananda's perspective, it's not from the Buddha's perspective.
That's right.
Unless the Buddha has sort of worked out that Ananda was sort of organising things for him, and he's telling the story from the point where he didn't realise that. He didn't quite know what was going on, but he was retrospectively sort of saying, well, there was this day when Ananda sort of organised things for me, and I didn't really know what was going on.
That's very true. Sometimes Ananda is quite often presented as the fall guy, isn't he? And that must be from the third position. Quite a lot of Pure Land fondness for Ananda, incidentally, identification with him. But it could also be from that position, though with a lot of respect, actually. I don't know. Sorry, what you can say.
Well, I mean, from a Zen pure,
It's the fall guy.
no, he was the kind of primary student.
Yes. Well, I think from
In
Pure
the
Land
lineage
in a
from
way.
7
Yeah.
Buddhas before Shesho Ananda.
Ananda was either not enlightened or very late.
He was, but it was just after
Yeah.
Shesho.
So he's not, I think that's another reason there's a
Just
different
kind of
identification with him, because he's not really the best student, you know. And we like that kind of thing.
You said he's like the personal assistant. So
Yes.
he's around and he knows
Yes.
what goes
He's a
on, he
friend.
sees it, and
Personal friend.
he's sort of a bit
Well,
of
you
a
get
PA behind the
You didn't
scenes.
get it, exactly.
He heard all the teachings but thought that the Buddha had something to perceive.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why he's often presented as the fall guy, isn't it? 'Cause it's,
Like a Kasho used to share the kind of seat with Buddha.
mm.
But I think it is interesting who's telling the story.
Yes, it is. It is. It has a very particular sort of feel to it, doesn't it?
Some of them, it's just like, you know, and the Buddha said, and then it's sort of like, so there's, apart from the first few lines, it's just, you know that somebody's just repeating what the Buddha said, but there's a whole story around here, which is somebody else's story.
Yes, there
The
is.
Buddha's-
It's whispers, isn't
It's
it?
very personal.
Yeah.
It's a corruption because it was normal tradition. Also, it has that kind of personal family with some kind of reputation. You know, it is a,
Yes. But that's
it has
because
to
of
be
the
a
oral.
corruption.
Of what?
Because it's normal tradition.
It's normal
There's
tradition.
one person sort of, you know, normal traditions always get kind of, maybe corruption is
Yeah.
kind of harsh word, but they kind of get reinterpreted.
Yeah.
Bits
Yeah.
get stuck
Yeah.
on, the bits get kind of left out.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of written down. I mean, it's possibly sort of very different from...
Which is why the sort of the odd bits are the interesting bits, I think, because things like the Buddha coughed and not there.
Well, there's a storyteller, isn't there?
Yes.
And presumably it's one of the disciples who is the carrier of that sutra, who has sort of created into a story that is, you know, gripping. That
It's a good dramatic device, isn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's not
very good.
it's not random, obviously, but
No,
as you
it's
say,
not
it's a
random.
dramatic
None of
device
it's
to sort
random,
of
I think.
to make it real and human. And but so you could say that whoever is the disciple that is the storyteller has brought together information from different sources to craft it, and different people have contributed to that story at some point.
And given that there are many accounts of the Buddha's enlightenment, this is a particular one that doesn't really focus on the enlightenment experience as such. It focuses much more on whose company he chose before and after.
I don't want this to become some kind of scholarly discussion, but the sutra is quite interesting because the Mahayana Sutras very probably weren't told by the Buddha. This idea that there were kind of, guarding them at the bottom of the sea.
That's a nice story too.
Mountains. But likely most of the Mahayana Sutras weren't spoken by the Buddha. That isn't always self-important.
No, it's not part of that. No, it's, yeah.
It's not?
It felt like a stepping point.
Yeah.